I don't believe men were created to be pawns in someone else's game. I believe we were created to be steward kings. Men under authority, yes, but entrusted with real responsibility. Not perfect men, but disciplined ones. Men who rule themselves, serve God directly, and refuse to live in fear. This is king, not pawn. And I want to go ahead and introduce to you this idea today of the soft world we have inherited. We live in one of the most comfortable civilizations that have ever existed, and that's not an opinion, that is a fact. Climate controlled homes, food available at any hour of the day, entertainment without limit, and pleasure without pursuit, even distraction without resistance. And yet there is something deeply wrong with that we need to talk about. Men are more anxious now than they ever have been. They're more medicated than ever, more isolated, more distracted, and more unsure of who they are and what they're here for. And this is the paradox of comfort. The easier life becomes on the outside, the weaker man becomes on the inside. And Christianity has not been immune to this, and in many cases, it has been reshaped to accommodate it. In many respects, comfort could also be a false god. Comfort is not just a preference anymore, it's a value, it's a guiding principle. A silent God that determines which truths are acceptable and which demands are quietly ignored. When comfort becomes sacred, Christianity changes. The question is no longer, what does God require of me? It becomes, what feels sustainable? What feels safe? What won't disrupt my lifestyle, my reputation, or my sense of ease? That shift produces a faith that is gentle, therapeutic, non-threatening. It also produces men who are passive, cautious, and spiritually dependent. And that right there is the pawn's bargain. Here is what that bargain really is when a whole bunch of men make it. I will believe, I will attend, I will behave within reason, but I will not fundamentally reorder my life. There's no real sacrifice there, no real risk, no real confrontation with weakness. Essentially, you just have enough religion to feel secure, not enough to actually be transformed. And that is pawn Christianity. Safe, predictable, managed. Comfort masquerades often as peace, but comfort is dangerous because it feels like peace. No conflict, no tension, no demand to grow. But Scripture draws a sharp distinction here. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you. John 14:27. The world's peace is anesthesia. It numbs you so nothing hurts anymore, including truth. Look, God's peace is alignment. It exists inside obedience, inside discipline, inside a rightly ordered life. Comfort avoids that friction. Peace endures it. And ultimately, men really are designed for resistance. Men are not built for ease. They are built for resistance, for friction, for strain. We need to overcome. When that instinct is properly ordered, it produces strength, competence, and leadership. When it is suppressed, it doesn't disappear. Actually, it mutates. It turns inward and becomes an addiction, escapism and quiet despair. And I hope you guys can hear me on this and what I'm about to say, and that we can all be adults here. Porn is not a pleasure problem. It's a resistance problem. So is substance abuse. So is endless scrolling. So is compulsive entertainment. These are not acts of rebellion. They are acts of sedation. So now let's just go and talk about it. How do men slowly decay? A man does not become weak all at once. He becomes weak incrementally. He chooses ease today, so discipline becomes harder tomorrow. He avoids discomfort now, so responsibility feels overwhelming later. Nothing dramatic actually happens. He just never advances. And that's how a pawn lives. Not destroyed, just unused. And this is where we can actually learn a lot when we talk about the sanitization of Christ. See, modern Christianity often presents Jesus as this endlessly soothing dude. And sure, is he compassionate? Yeah, but he's never demanding. We quote, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." But we often skip the next line, which reads, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me," Matthew 11:28 and 29. See, a yoke is not actually comfort. Guys, it is submission to discipline labor. Christ does not remove the burden or responsibility. He replaces chaos with order. And this is where we get into the cross not necessarily being metaphorical. Jesus makes this unmistakably clear when he says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me, Luke 9:23. A cross is not symbolic, it is an instrument of execution, right? Following Christ means the death of the comfortable self, the indulgent self, the cowardly self, the self that wants salvation without transformation. That is not cruelty, that's rebirth. And now let's just go ahead and dive into why men instinctively resist soft faith. Most men already do kind of know this at a gut level. That's why rest feels better after work, why food tastes better after fasting, why victory means nothing to us without struggle. It's why men willingly subject themselves to hardship, heavy weights, long hours, dangerous jobs, training that hurts, not because they hate themselves, but because meaning is found in the far side of resistance. A faith that costs nothing feels fake to men, and that's because it is fake. Comfort is how discipline dies. Discipline cannot survive in a frictionless environment. Remove resistance and self-control atrophies. Scripture warns about this repeatedly. Woe to those who are at ease in Zion, Amos 6:1. Ease breeds complacency, and complacency breeds decay. Comfort is not neutral. It's actually very spiritually corrosive. And that has kind of led us to this, weak theology for weak men in our culture today. A theology that demands nothing, will always be popular with men who want to change nothing. Grace becomes a hiding place, and forgiveness becomes a loophole, and love becomes, permission. But Scripture never divorces grace from transformation. Shall we continue to sin that grace may abound? By no means. Romans 6:1-2. Look, Paul was really clear when he said that. Grace is not the excuse to remain weak. It is the power to become strong. Steward kings choose difficulty early. A pawn simply avoids discomfort until it's forced on him. A steward king, we choose difficulty voluntarily, so chaos doesn't choose him later. He trains when, rest is available. He restrains himself when indulgence is easy. He speaks truth when silence would be safer. None of this saves him, but it does prepare him. And God entrusts authority to prepared men. This pattern is everywhere in Scripture. David shepherds before he rules. Joseph serves before he governs. Moses is humbled before he leads. Jesus even waited 30 years before he started his public ministry. God does not rush responsibility. But guess what? Comfort actually delays readiness. Comfort makes men like children. Comfort keeps men dependent on all these systems, which there's a lot of systems we could get into later, but they keeps us dependent on leaders too, constant reassurance. And a man who never carries weight never develops spiritual muscle. Solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice. Hebrews 5:14. Practice implies strain. There is no maturity without resistance. So look, here's the choice you have. Comfort will never ask much of you. God will. The world will happily keep you passive, distracted, managed, entertained. God calls men to rule themselves, so they can steward what he places under their care. If your faith costs you nothing, it will produce nothing. You don't become a king by accident, you become one by choosing discipline. When comfort is available, by choosing truth. When silence is easier, by choosing responsibility. When passivity is rewarded, this is king, not pawn. Choose difficulty now, or be ruled by chaos and fear later.